He won a cursed hot spring property for $1 at cards. 2 sick sisters were soaking in it. The deed was folded so many times it had gone soft as cloth, and Ezra Tull set it on the table like it was something dead he didn't want touching his hand too long. "That's it," he said. "Hot iron spring, 80 acres, a bathhouse, and $1's worth of bad luck." I had $11 left to my name, and a hand with 2 pair I didn't trust. Ezra had been losing all night, the kind of losing a man does when he's already decided he's going to lose and just wants it over with. He smelled like rye and old sweat, and his eyes kept going to the window like the dark outside might come collect on something. "Cursed," he said again, in case I hadn't caught it the first time. "Old Comanche woman drowned her own babe in that spring 40 years back, sooner than let the soldiers take it. Story goes the water never forgets. 2 owners since, both dead inside the year. One fell off his own roof, other just stopped, sat down in a chair and stopped." "You believe that?" "Don't matter what I believe. Matters what the bank believes, and the bank won't touch it, and I got debts that don't care about ghosts." He pushed the deed another inch toward the pot. $1 against your 2 pair, mister. You want it or not." I'd been called a fool before, called worse. I looked at that deed sitting there soft and pale in the lamplight, and something in me, maybe just tiredness, maybe something with more weight to it, said take it. I put my dollar down. He had a pair of 4s. That's how I came to own 140 feet of cursed water, and a bathhouse with a caved-in roof. For the price of a meal I never got to eat that night, because Ezra Tull's friends didn't care for how the hand had gone, and I left town with a split lip and a deed in my coat, and not much else. My name's Cole Ransom. I was 38 years old that spring, which is old enough to know better and young enough to do it anyway. Spent 20 years drifting, cattle, freight, a stretch breaking horses for an outfit in the nations, a year I don't talk about working a claim that didn't pay. Never married. Never stayed anywhere long enough for a woman to get a good look at me and decide whether I was worth the trouble. I'd gotten used to being the kind of man rooms forget the minute he leaves them. I rode out to Hot Iron Spring 3 days later, mostly because I had nowhere else worth riding to. It sat in a fold of red rock about 2 hours west of nothing, steam coming up off the ground in thin ropes even in the cold morning, like the earth itself was breathing slow. The bathhouse was log and stone, half its shingle roof stove in from some old storm, the door hanging crooked on one hinge. I figured on finding it empty. Figured on sleeping there a night or two, maybe selling the deed to the next fool who didn't know better and moving on. What I found instead was a girl standing in the doorway with a shotgun pointed at my chest, and steam rising up behind her like she'd walked straight out of the ground. "That's far enough," she said. She wasn't more than 5'4", dark hair pulled back hard enough to hurt, a man's coat over a dress that had been mended so many times the mending was its own pattern. The shotgun didn't shake. I'll give her that, it didn't shake at all. "I won this property," I said, slow, hands where she could see them. "Got the deed in my coat if you want to see it. Don't care whose name's on paper. This is where we're staying, and you're not coming in that door." Behind her faint, I heard coughing. A young voice, wet and tired sounding, the kind of cough that's been going on long enough to wear a hole in a person. "Who's that?" I said. Something moved across her face, not fear exactly, something harder to name. Protective is the closest word. "My sister, she's sick, and we got nowhere else, so you can shoot me if you want this water bad enough, but I'm not walking her back out into that cold." I stood there a long moment with a deed in my pocket and a shotgun in my face and a coughing girl somewhere behind a broken door. And I thought about Ezra Tull's voice telling me the water never forgets. And I thought, not for the first time, that I'd won myself something I didn't understand the shape of yet. "I'm not here to put anybody out," I said. "Name's Cole. I'll make camp outside tonight. We can talk in the morning when you're not pointing that thing at me." She didn't lower the gun, but she didn't shoot me either, and after a while she stepped back into the doorway, into the steam, and the door creaked shut, and I heard a bar drop across it from the inside. I made camp 40 feet off, close enough to hear if something went wrong, far enough to say I'd respected the line she'd drawn. I didn't sleep much. Cold has a way of getting into a man's joints at 38 that it didn't at 20, and I lay there listening to that girl cough through the log wall, slow and tearing, and I thought about my own mother's last winter, the sound she'd made trying to breathe, and something in my chest went tight that I hadn't given permission to go tight. By morning, frost had silvered my blanket, and there was a thin line of smoke coming up from the bathhouse chimney that hadn't been there the night before. I built up my own fire, made coffee, and didn't go near the door. It was near noon when it opened on its own. She came out first, the one with the shotgun, except this time it was slung over her shoulder instead of aimed at me, which I took as a kind of progress. Behind her came the sister, younger, maybe 16 or 17, thin as a fence rail, wrapped in 3 blankets despite the steam rising all around the spring. Her face had the gray look sickness puts on a person, cheeks gone hollow, but her eyes when they found me were sharp and curious in a way her body didn't match. "You're the one who won the deed," the older one said. It wasn't a question. "I am. You planning on putting us out?" I looked past her at the younger girl, who was watching me like I might be the most interesting thing she'd seen in months, which maybe I was. I looked at the bathhouse with its caved roof and crooked door, at the steam coming up off red rock that the whole county said was cursed, at 2 sisters who'd clearly been living rough a long time before they found this place. "No," I said, "I'm not." "Then what?" I thought about it honest before I answered, because she deserved an honest answer, and I figured she'd know a lie when she heard one. "I don't rightly know yet, but I know I'm not putting a sick girl out into the cold over a piece of paper I won at cards. Whatever this place is, whatever it's cursed with or not, there's room enough for all of us to figure it out slow. I want to say something here about who I was before that morning, because a man doesn't arrive at a doorway with a shotgun pointed at him out of nowhere. He arrives there carrying 20 years behind him, and those years shape how he stands when the gun comes up. I'd been raised on a hardscrabble place in the Texas Hill Country, 3rd of 5 boys, the kind of family where there wasn't enough attention to go around, and a quiet boy learned early that the way to get fed was to be useful, not to be loud. My father worked himself thin on land that wasn't his, season after season, for men who never once said his name with respect in it. I watched that. Told myself at 15 I'd never let myself be that, worked hard and unseen, used up and unthanked. So I left, drifted cattle drives out of San Antonio at 16, broke horses in the nations at 20, ran freight through country mean enough to kill a careless man twice over. I was good at all of it. Steady hands, a level head in trouble, the kind of competence that gets a man hired again and again but rarely gets him remembered by name. Foremen liked having me around. None of them ever asked me to stay on past the season. I told myself that suited me fine. A man without roots can't be disappointed when nobody puts down roots toward him. There'd been a woman once in Abilene when I was 26. Good woman, ran her father's mercantile with a steady hand and a sharp tongue I liked the taste of. I courted her 2 seasons, careful, slow, the way a man does when he's not sure he's worth the trouble. Her father didn't think a drifting hand was worth his daughter's future, and I didn't have the words or the standing to argue him wrong, and I rode out one morning without saying goodbye because I didn't trust myself to say it without falling apart in front of her. I heard years later she'd married a banker. I told myself I was glad for her. Mostly I was. After that, I stopped letting myself want things that required a man to stay in one place long enough to be known. Easier that way. A rolling stone doesn't get its heart broke. My mother used to say, except she always said it sad, like she knew the cost of it better than the comfort. So that's the man who rode up to Hot Iron Spring with $11, and a deed he didn't trust, 38 years old, good with his hands, good in a fight if it came to one, and entirely unused to anybody needing him to stay. Her name was Adeline Voss. Her sister was Ruth. Their father had run a freight line out of Dodge that went under 2 years back, and their mother had died of the same sickness now eating at Ruth from the inside, slow and patient as winter. Adeline had brought her sister west on a rumor. An old woman in a wagon train had told her the hot mineral water at Hot Iron Spring could draw sickness up out of the lungs, that it had healed a soldier with consumption so bad the army doctors had given him up for dead. Adeline didn't strike me as a woman who believed in miracles. She struck me as a woman who'd run out of other things to try. They'd been squatting there 6 weeks, living off rabbit and what little Adeline could shoot, soaking Ruth in the spring twice a day on the old woman's word. Watching the cough some days seem to ease and other days come back twice as hard. I didn't ask about the curse. I figured if it was real, it'd announce itself in its own time. What I did that first week was fix the roof. I'm no carpenter, but I'd built enough lined shacks and lean-tos in my drifting years to know which end of a hammer does the work. Adeline watched me from a distance the first 2 days, shotgun never far from her hand, like she expected me to turn into something else the moment her guard dropped. By the third day, she was handing me nails. By the fifth, she was holding the ladder. "You don't have to do this," she said, the fifth evening, watching me drive the last shingle into place against a sky gone the color of a fresh bruise. "I know I don't have to." "Then why?" I climbed down, knees complaining the whole way, and looked at the roof, patched, ugly, but it'd hold rain now, hold snow when it came. "Man's got to do something with his hands or he starts thinking too much," I said. "And there's a sick girl sleeping under it. Didn't seem right to leave it broke." She studied me a long moment in that fading light, like she was trying to find the catch in it, the angle, the thing a man usually wants in return for kindness. I let her look. I didn't have an angle to find. "My father was a good man," she said finally, quiet. "Worked himself into the ground for us. Died owing money to men who never once worked a day as hard as he did. I learned young that good men don't always win, Mr. Ransom, so you'll forgive me if I keep waiting for the other thing." "Take your time," I said. "I'm not going anywhere tonight." That became, without either of us deciding it on purpose, the shape of things. I wasn't going anywhere tonight, then the next night, then the one after that. Ruth was the one who told me 2 weeks in about the curse. Not scared of it the way her sister was wary of me, but curious, turning it over like a stone she wanted to see the underside of. She was soaking in the spring when she told it, steam wrapped around her thin shoulders, her dark hair plastered to her neck. I'd taken to sitting a respectful distance off during her soaking times, close enough to hear if she needed help out, far enough to give her privacy, and she'd taken to talking to me through that distance like the steam made it easier to say things. "Old woman in the wagon train told it different than most folks do," Ruth said. Her voice had a rasp to it that never fully left, even on her good days. "Said it wasn't a curse at all. Said a Comanche woman lost her baby to the soldier's sickness, the coughing kind, same as what's in me, and she brought the child here because the water was sacred, was supposed to draw bad spirits up out of the body. Child died anyway. And the woman, grieving, she cursed not the water but the soldiers who'd brought the sickness in the first place. Cursed them to never find peace here. Never said a word against anyone who came after with an honest need. That's a kinder version than the one I heard. Most true things are kinder than the version that gets repeated." She looked at me sideways, steam curling between us. "You believe it." "I believe the water's hot and it feels good on tired bones," I said. "Rest of it I don't know enough to say." "Adeline doesn't believe any of it. Good or bad, she thinks believing in things is how you get hurt." "And you?" Ruth was quiet a moment, watching the steam rise. "I think I'd like to believe in something, even if it's wrong, beats not believing in anything at all." I thought about that a long while after, walking the perimeter that night the way I'd started doing, checking the horses, checking the tree line, the old habit of a man who'd slept too many nights in places where not checking got you killed. I thought about a girl not yet 17, sick enough that some mornings she couldn't lift a coffee cup without her hand shaking, choosing to believe in something anyway. There was a kind of toughness in that I hadn't expected to find way out here. In two women the world had mostly written off. I found I admired it. Found I admired both of them, in fact, in ways that had nothing to do with what either one looked like, and everything to do with what they were made of. The bad night came in the 4th week, and it came the way bad nights always do, without announcing itself first. I woke to Adeline's voice outside my lean-to, sharp and scared in a way I hadn't heard from her yet, not even that first night with the shotgun. "Cole, Cole, I need you." I was up and moving before I was fully awake, the old soldier's habit, boots on, rifle in hand out of pure reflex before my mind caught up to what was happening. Adeline was standing in the bathhouse doorway with a lamp, her face gone the color of ash. "She can't breathe right," Adeline said. "She's burning up and she can't breathe and I don't. I don't know what to do. I've tried everything I'd seen this before. My mother that last winter. The lungs filling up, the fever climbing, the body fighting a war it was losing slow. "Get her in the water," I said. "Hottest part of the spring where it comes up out of the rock, now. It's the middle of the night, the cold will. The cold outside, the water won't touch her if the water's hot enough, and we keep her covered after. Trust me on this one thing." She looked at me a half-second longer than I liked, weighing it, and then she nodded, and we moved together, me carrying Ruth. who weighed next to nothing, light as a bundle of dry sticks. Her skin radiating heat I could feel through the blanket, her breath coming in short, tearing pulls that scared me more than I let show on my face. We got her into the water at the spring's source, where it bubbled up hottest, and held her there between us, Adeline on one side and me on the other, Ruth's head resting against her sister's shoulder while I kept watch on her breathing and her color. "Talk to her," I said. "Keep her talking. Don't let her go quiet on us." Adeline talked about their mother, about a dog they'd had as girls, about nothing and everything, her voice cracking and going on anyway, and I held Ruth's thin shoulders steady in that hot water under a black sky thick with more stars than I'd seen in years, and somewhere in that long stretch of dark her breathing started to ease. Not fixed, not whole, but easier, the tearing sound smoothing into something almost like a normal breath. We stayed in that water past midnight, the three of us, until Ruth's eyes fluttered and held, and she said, weak but clear, "I'm tired of you two looking at me like that." Adeline let out a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, and pressed her face into her sister's wet hair. And I sat there in the steam with my arms still under Ruth's shoulders, not moving, not wanting to break whatever was happening in that moment between the two of them. We got Ruth out, dried, wrapped into the bed by the fire. She slept. Adeline sat beside her a long while, not sleeping, just watching her sister breathe. And I sat outside the door with my rifle across my knees the way I'd taken to doing on bad nights, not because I expected trouble from outside, but because it gave my hands something to hold while my mind sat with what we'd just been through. Adeline came out near dawn, wrapped in a blanket, and sat down on the step beside me without asking if she could. "She's sleeping easy," she said. "First time in days." "Good." We sat quiet a while, the gray light starting to come up over the rocks, steam still rising off the spring in front of us, soft as breath. "I want to say thank you," Adeline said. "And I find I don't know how exactly. We've had men offer us things before, Mr. Ransom, offer help. It always came with a string on it somewhere, sooner or later. I've gotten so used to looking for the string I almost missed that you didn't have one." "Don't have one," I said. "Never did." "I know that now. Took me a month to let myself know it." She looked at me then, properly in that gray dawn light, like she was seeing me for the first time instead of the fourth week running. "My father used to say a man shows you who he is in the third hour of a hard night, not the first. Most men are fine company in the first hour. It's the third hour that tells you." "What hour are we on now?" A small, tired smile crossed her face, the first real one I'd seen from her. "I think we're well past the third. There's a kind of work that teaches you a person better than conversation does, and over that next month I learned Adeline Voss mostly through her hands. She had a way of mending that told you everything about how she'd been raised, careful, economical, never wasting a scrap of cloth, or a length of thread that could be used again. She mended my shirt sleeve one evening without asking, just took the shirt off the line where I'd hung it to dry and handed it back an hour later with the tear closed so neat you'd have to look hard to find where it had been. I thanked her. She shrugged it off like it was nothing, but I noticed she'd used thread that matched close as she could get it, which told me it wasn't nothing to her either. I learned she hummed when she thought nobody could hear her, old hymns mostly, half remembered, the tune right but half the words gone missing. I learned she didn't like being watched while she ate, a habit from some leaner year I never asked about and she never explained. I learned she checked on Ruth 3 times a night without fail, soft-footed, never waking her, just laying a hand light on her sister's forehead to check for fever before going back to her own bed. I started doing small things in return, not grand gestures, just the kind of attention a man pays when he's noticing somebody close. Split extra kindling so she wouldn't have to do it before her hands warmed up in the morning chill. Started boiling the coffee a shade weaker after I noticed she watered hers down most mornings and never said why. Hung a second lantern by the spring's edge so Ruth's evening soak wouldn't leave Adeline squinting in the dark when she came to walk her sister back in. None of it was much, all of it added up. "You pay attention," Adeline said to me one evening, watching me string a second lantern wire without being asked. "More than most men I've known. Most men look at a woman and see what she can do for them. You look and you see what she needs before she said a word about it." "Spent a lot of years being the one nobody noticed needed anything," I said. "Guess it taught me to notice it in other people." She was quiet at that, turning it over. "That sounds lonelier than you're saying it." "Wasn't asking for sympathy." I know you weren't. That's not why I said it. She looked at me a long moment in the lantern light, something working behind her eyes. I think you've spent your whole life being useful to people who never once thought to ask if you needed anything back. I think that's a particular kind of hungry, the kind that doesn't show on a man's face because he's stopped expecting to be fed. I didn't have an answer for that. She'd seen something true and named it plainer than I'd ever managed to name it myself. And there's a strange kind of relief in being seen that clear by somebody, even when what they see is a thing you'd rather have kept hidden. You're not wrong, I said finally. I know I'm not. She reached over and touched the back of my hand just briefly, just enough to mean something. I intend to keep noticing you, Cole Ransom, however long you're inclined to let me. The trouble when it came didn't come from any curse. It came from Dawes, the way it does in that high red country, and the days settled into something I hadn't had in 20 years of drifting, a rhythm. I fixed what needed fixing around that bathhouse, built a proper corral for the 2 horses we had between us. Adeline and I split the hunting and the cooking without ever quite agreeing out loud that we were splitting anything, the way 2 people do when neither one wants to name what's forming between them for fear of scaring it off. Spring opened slow into summer, the way it does in that high red country, and the days settled into something I hadn't had in 20 years of drifting, a rhythm. I fixed what needed fixing around that bathhouse, built a proper corral for the 2 horses we had between us. Patched the chimney where the mortar had crumbled, dug a second runoff channel so the overflow water didn't pool and freeze come winter, replaced the warped door with one I planed myself out of cottonwood I cut, and dried over 6 slow weeks because Adeline mentioned once, just once, that the old door's crooked hang bothered her more than she let on. Adeline and I split the hunting and the cooking without ever quite agreeing out loud that we were splitting anything, the way 2 people do when neither one wants to name what's forming between them for fear of scaring it off. She was a fair shot, better than fair, taught by a father who'd believed a girl alone in rough country needed to know how to feed herself and protect herself both. I watched her bring down a deer at 60 yards the second week of summer with a borrowed rifle she'd never fired before, and I didn't say anything about it being unusual for a woman, because I'd learned by then that saying things like that to Adeline Voss earned you a look that could curdle milk. My father didn't raise me to need a man standing between me and trouble, she told me once, field dressing that deer with quick, sure hands while I held the legs steady. He raised me to handle trouble myself, and to recognize the difference between a man who respects that and a man who wants to take it from me. Which am I asked, half teasing. She didn't answer right away, working the knife with the same careful attention she gave everything. Jury's still out, she said, but there wasn't any edge in it. There was something almost fond. I came to understand, over those weeks, that Adeline didn't need rescuing and never had. What she needed, what both sisters needed in their different ways, was somebody steady enough to stand alongside the fight instead of either running from it or trying to take it over. I'd spent my whole life being the kind of man who showed up, did the work, and moved on before anyone got too used to him being there. For the first time, I found myself wanting to be the kind of man who stayed long enough to be counted on. Ruth got stronger. Not all at once, not in any way you could point to and say there, that's the day it turned asterisk, but steady, the way good things turn when you stop watching for them every minute. Her cough eased to where it only came bad on cold mornings. Color came back into her face. She started walking the rock trails above the spring in the late afternoons, slow at first, then less slow, and I'd watch her go and feel something in my chest ease that had been tight since that first night I heard her coughing through a log wall. She took to teaching me things, the way the young do when they've decided an older man is worth the trouble of educating. Showed me which plants by the creek were good eating and which would make a man sick. Taught me 3-card tricks her father had shown her, sleight of hand stuff, fast fingers, and actually laughed, a real sound, when I couldn't get the third one right no matter how many times she walked me through it. You're better with a hammer than a deck of cards, Mr. Ransom, she told me, grinning. Won this whole place on a card hand, I said. Don't go telling me I'm no good at it. You won it because the other fella had worse cards than you and worse luck besides. That's not the same as being good. I couldn't argue with that and didn't try. Adeline watched these exchanges from wherever she happened to be, mending, cooking, cleaning rifles, with an expression I came to know well over those weeks. Not jealousy, something closer to relief, like she was watching a debt get paid that she hadn't known how to pay herself. Her sister laughing. Her sister's strong enough to walk a rock trail and tease a grown man about his card skills. I think every laugh out of Ruth's mouth was, to Adeline, a small piece of proof that the gamble of coming west hadn't been a foolish one. One evening in early summer, with Ruth asleep early and the fire burned down to coals, Adeline, and I sat outside the bathhouse the way we'd taken to doing most nights, not talking much, just sitting with the quiet between us the way two people sit who have stopped needing to fill every silence with words. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to let me finish before you say anything back." "All right." When I pointed that shotgun at you that first night, I'd made up my mind already that whoever came through that door with a deed in his pocket was going to be a man I'd have to fight, one way or another. Either fight him off, or fight what he wanted in return for letting us stay. I'd built the whole shape of you in my head before I ever saw your face. And you didn't fit a single piece of it. She turned the cup in her hands, not looking at me, the firelight catching the side of her face. You just kept showing up, fixed the roof, sat with Ruth in the water that bad night and didn't once make it about yourself, didn't once say, "Look what I did for you." You just did it because it needed doing. I've never known a man who did things because they needed doing and not because he wanted credit for the doing. "My father was the same way," I said, which wasn't something I talked about often. "Worked himself half to death on other men's land because the work needed doing, not because anybody thanked him for it. I used to think that made him a fool. Spent 20 years drifting so nobody could pin me down to that kind of foolishness." I looked at the fire, at the coals going from orange to gray at the edges. "Took me till about your sister's third bad cough to figure out it wasn't foolishness at all. It was just about the only thing worth being." Adeline was quiet a long moment. Then she reached over, slow, like she was giving me every chance to pull away if I wanted to, and put her hand over mine where it rested on my knee. "I see you, Cole Ransom," she said. "Whatever this place is cursed with or blessed with, I see exactly what you are, and I am done waiting for the string." I turned my hand under hers so our fingers laced together, rough palm against rough palm, two people who'd both worked too hard for too long to have soft hands anymore. And we sat like that a good while, not saying anything else, because there wasn't anything else that needed saying right then. That was the night I stopped thinking of myself as a man just passing through. The trouble, when it came, didn't come from any curse. It came from Dawes. His name was Harlan Dawes, and he rode in on a gray gelding on a hot afternoon in late July with two men behind him, and a paper of his own folded in his saddlebag. I was up on the roof reinforcing a beam when I heard the horses, and I came down slow, rifle left leaning where I could reach it but not carrying it, because three strange riders in a place like this called for caution, not provocation. "You'd be Ransom," Dawes said. He had the look of a man who'd never done a day's hard labor and didn't intend to start, soft hands, a coat too fine for the dust, a way of sitting his horse like the world owed him the view from up there. "I am help you with something. You can help me by getting off my property." He pulled the folded paper from his saddlebag and tossed it down at my feet without dismounting, which told me plenty about the kind of man he was before he said another word. "Bill of sale. Ezra Tull sold me this spring 3 months back, before he ever lost it to you in some card game. Tull didn't have the right to wager something he'd already sold, which makes your deed worthless and makes you a squatter on my land." I picked up the paper. It looked legal enough, a county seal, a notary's mark, dates that lined up clean. Maybe it was forged. Maybe Ezra Tull really had sold the place twice over, once for cash and once on a card table, the kind of man who'd do exactly that without losing a minute's sleep over it. Either way, I was a drifter with no lawyer and no money for one, standing against a man who clearly had both. "I'll need time to look into this," I said. "You'll need to be gone by week's end." Dawes' eyes slid past me to the bathhouse to where Adeline had come to stand in the doorway, Ruth just behind her shoulder. Something in his look when it landed on Adeline made my hand want to drift toward the rifle I'd left leaning, made every old soldier instinct in me come up sharp and watchful. "Course," he said, slower now, "there might be room to talk. A man in your position, no real claim, no money, two women depending on you that aren't even your own blood, might find it easier to make some kind of arrangement. I'm not an unreasonable man, Ransom." "Say what you mean, Dawes." "I mean the spring's worth more to me with the women still on it than without. There's men in 3 counties who'd pay good money to soak in cursed water with pretty company close at hand. I'm offering you a partnership. Walk away from the deed dispute, and I'll cut you a fair piece of what this place earns once it's run proper. The meaning of it landed slow, and then all at once, the way a punch does when you see it coming but can't move fast enough. I felt something go cold and still in me, the particular stillness that comes right before a man does something he can't take back. Get off this land, I said, before I decide your horse can carry you out of here without the rest of you attached to it. Dawes' smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Week's end ransom. I'll have the sheriff out from Larkin with proper paper, and you can explain to him how a card table deed beats a notarized bill of sale. Or you can think on my other offer. Either way, you've got 6 days. He turned his gelding and rode out, his 2 men falling in behind, and I stood there in the dust with a forged or true bill of sale in my hand, feeling older than I had in years. Adeline came to me that night with a face gone hard and pale at once, the kind of hard that comes from being scared and refusing to let the scared show. He meant what I think he meant, she said. It wasn't a question. He did. And you're standing here instead of riding to Larkin to put a bullet in him. Why exactly? Because a bullet in him puts a rope on my neck and leaves you and Ruth alone out here with nobody, and that's worse than anything Dawes can do with a piece of forged paper. I sat down heavy on the bench outside the door, turning the bill of sale over in my hands again, like staring at it might change what it said. I need to ride to the county seat, find out if Tull really did sell this place twice, or if this paper's a lie cut from whole cloth. Either way, I need it settled by something stronger than my say-so against his. And if it's true, if he really does own it. I looked up at her, at Ruth standing pale and frightened just behind her in the doorway, at the steam rising soft off the spring that had near healed one sister and started, slow, to mend something broken in me too. Then I'll find another way, I said. I didn't fix that roof and sit in that water with your sister and come to feel about the 2 of you the way I've come to feel just to hand you over to a man like Dawes because of a piece of paper. Paper's paper. I'll find a way around it if I have to. Adeline crossed the small distance between us and sat down beside me close, her shoulder against mine. I'm not going to pretend I'm not scared, she said. I've been scared before, plenty. But I've never had someone standing beside me scared instead of standing scared alone. That's a different thing entirely. I put my arm around her, and she let her head rest against my shoulder, and Ruth came and sat on my other side without a word, small and warm against my arm. And the 3 of us sat like that a long while under a sky going purple and then black, steam rising in front of us. And for the first time in 20 years of drifting, I understood what it might feel like to have something worth fighting to keep instead of something easy to walk away from. I didn't sleep that night, not really. Lay awake working through what 6 days meant, what kind of fight Dawes was likely to bring, whether I had it in me to face down 2 hired guns and a borrowed law if it came to that. I'd been in fights before, knew the weight of a gun in my hand and the particular silence that falls over a man right before trouble starts. What I hadn't had before in any of those old fights was anything behind me worth protecting bad enough to make my hand steadier instead of shakier. I found, lying there in the dark listening to Ruth's now easy breathing through the wall, that the weight of it didn't scare me the way I'd have expected. It settled something in me instead. Gave the fight a shape and a reason that all my old fights, fought for wages or for somebody else's cattle, never had. I rode to the county seat at first light, 2 days hard travel, and what I found there was uglier and simpler than I'd hoped. The county clerk, an old man named Prout with ink-stained fingers and a memory sharper than his eyes, dug through a ledger and confirmed it plain. Ezra Tull had indeed sold hot iron spring to Harlan Dawes, cash money, 6 weeks before our card game. Tull had wagered something he no longer owned, plain and simple, which under territorial law, Prout explained, didn't make my deed worthless outright, but did make it a contested claim that any judge would likely throw to whoever held the earlier, properly recorded sale. Dawes claims the stronger one on paper, Prout said. I'd be lying if I told you different. There any way around that? Prout studied me a long moment, the kind of look an old man gives a younger one when he's deciding how much truth to spend on him. Territorial law's got a wrinkle if a man knows to look for it. Continuous occupation and improvement of contested land, fixing it up, working it, living on it openly, for a period of 90 days without challenge from the rival claimant, can shift a judge's hand toward the occupant, especially if the rival claimant's been sitting on his hands the whole while doing nothing but waving paper around. You said you'd been out there how long? Going on 10 weeks. And Dawes never set foot on the place till 3 days back. Not that I know of. Pruitt almost smiled, the dry crack of an old man who'd seen plenty of liars try plenty of tricks, and didn't mind seeing one trick turned back around on the man who usually played it. Then you push this to 90 days, you get a judge to look at the improvements you've made, that roof, the corral, whatever else, and Dawes' paper stops looking quite so strong. Won't be a sure thing. Judges are men, and men can be bought same as anybody, but it's a fight worth having instead of a fight you walk away from. I rode back to Hot Iron Spring with something close to hope sitting strange and unfamiliar in my chest, a feeling I hadn't carried in so long I almost didn't recognize its shape. Dawes came back on the 6th day, same as he'd promised, with the same 2 riders and a man in a tin star I didn't recognize, not the regular sheriff, some deputized cousin or hired hand wearing the authority like a borrowed coat. I met them in the open ground in front of the bathhouse, Adeline a step behind my left shoulder with the shotgun loaded and steady in her hands, Ruth watching from the doorway with a stillness in her that hadn't been there 2 months back, the stillness of someone who'd already survived worse than this and knew her own strength now. I trust you've come to your senses, Dawes said. I rode to the county seat, I said. Talked to Pruitt at the clerk's office. Territorial laws got a continuous occupation clause, Dawes. I've been working and living openly on this land for 10 weeks, doing improvements you can see with your own eyes, while you sat in town doing nothing but waving a bill of sale around. Judge in Larkin's going to want to weigh that against you, not just hand you the place because you've got an earlier piece of paper and a meaner attitude. Something flickered behind Dawes' eyes, not fear exactly, but the recalculation of a man who'd expected an easy fight and was finding out it wasn't going to be one. That's a thin reed to hang a claim on. Thin or not, it's enough to drag this into a courtroom instead of letting you ride out here and bully a woman and a sick girl off land they've nursed back to health with their own hands. You want this place, Dawes? You're going to have to win it in front of a judge, in daylight, with your name on record instead of hiding behind paper and threats. That what you want? Your name in the Larkin paper, the kind of offer you made me on record for a judge to hear. I watched the calculation finish behind his eyes, watched him weigh the trouble of a public fight against the ease of finding some other piece of cursed or uncursed land to bully somebody else off of, and I watched him decide it wasn't worth it. This isn't finished, he said, which men like Dawes always say when it is, in fact, finished. It is for today, I said. Get off this land. He turned his gelding, and this time he didn't look back at the doorway where Adeline and Ruth stood, and I understood that whatever calculation he'd made, it had included deciding the spring wasn't worth the fight it'd take to claim it from a man willing to stand his ground in front of witnesses and a future judge both. They rode out, dust hanging behind them in the heat, and I stood there a long moment feeling something unclench in my chest that had been clenched tight for 6 days running. Adeline lowered the shotgun, slow, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed, the way a person's hands shake after instead of during. I turned and caught her before she fully knew she was falling into me, and she pressed her face into my shoulder and held on, and I held her back, the 2 of us standing there in the dust with the spring steaming soft behind us and Ruth's quiet, steady breathing the only other sound in that whole Red Rock afternoon. You did that, Adeline said, muffled against my shoulder. You stood there and you did that for us. I did it because it needed doing, I said, same as the roof, same as everything else. She pulled back enough to look at me, her eyes wet but her jaw set hard and certain. There's men who'd have run, Cole, men who'd have decided the fight wasn't theirs to have, told us it was a shame and ridden on to somewhere easier. You didn't run. Wasn't ever going to. I know that now, she said. I think I've known it for weeks. I was just waiting to see if you knew it too. The 90 days came and went, and the legal fight, when it finally landed in front of a judge in Larkin that autumn, went about as quiet and unremarkable as a thing can go after all the danger of it has already burned off in the months before. Pruitt's wrinkle in the law held up exactly the way he'd said it might. The judge looked at the improvements, the roof, the corral, 2 affidavits from neighboring ranchers who'd seen me working that land openly all summer, and looked at Dawes' earlier paper and his complete absence from the property until the very week he'd come to threaten us, and ruled the continuous occupation carried the day. The deed was mine, clean and uncontested, recorded fresh in the county ledger with my name on it and nobody else's. Dawes didn't come back. Men like that, once a fight stops being easy, generally find some other piece of ground to bully somebody off of, and I never heard his name again after that courtroom, which suited me fine. Autumn came on slow and gold across the red rock, the cottonwoods down by the creek turning the color of old coins, and with it came a quiet I hadn't expected after the noise of the Dawes trouble, not an empty quiet, but a full one, the kind that settles over a place once the fighting's done and the living can start again in earnest. Ruth took to drawing that fall, charcoal on scraps of paper Pruitt had sent out with his last letter, sketching the spring, the bathhouse, a hawk she'd watched circle the rocks 3 mornings running. She wasn't bad at it. Better than not bad, in fact. There was a steadiness in her lines that hadn't been in her hands 6 months before, when just lifting a coffee cup had cost her something. "You should sell these," I told her one evening, looking over a sketch of the spring at dusk, steam rendered in soft gray strokes rising off dark water. "Folks in Larkin would pay for work like this." "Maybe someday." She studied the drawing herself, head tilted, the same curious look she'd worn that first week asking me about curses. "I like that it's just mine for now. Didn't have much that was just mine the last few years. Mostly just had the cough, and that wasn't ever really mine, felt more like something that had me." I understood that better than she probably knew. A man who'd spent 20 years being defined by his usefulness to other outfits, other men's cattle, other men's land, understood exactly what it meant to finally have something. A place, a person, a quiet evening with nothing required of you but to sit and watch the light go gold. That belonged to nobody's use but your own peace. Adeline came to stand in the doorway behind us that evening, drying her hands on her apron, watching her sister's charcoal-stained fingers with an expression I'd come to recognize as her particular kind of joy. Quiet, unshowy. The joy of a woman who measured her happiness mostly in the well-being of the people she loved, rather than anything claimed for herself. "She used to draw all the time before our mother got sick," Adeline said to me later, low, once Ruth had gone into sleep. "Stopped entirely those last 2 years. I think she didn't have room left in her for anything but worrying. Watching her pick it back up this fall, she stopped, throat working. I didn't know how much I'd missed it till I saw her doing it again." "You did that," I said. "Brought her here, kept her alive long enough for the water and the rest of it to do its work. Whatever's mine in this, the credit for her living at all belongs to you." "We did it," Adeline said, firm, like she wasn't going to let me argue the point. "I got her here. You're the reason we both got to stay long enough for it to matter." Ruth's cough, by the time the first snow came that winter, had gone from a daily fight to an occasional whisper of one, mostly on the coldest mornings, mostly gone by noon. The hot mineral water had done what the old woman on the wagon train had promised it might, or maybe it was just time and rest, and being somewhere safe enough that a body could finally stop fighting 2 wars at once, the sickness and the fear both. Either way, by that winter she'd filled out some, color steady in her cheeks, and she'd taken to helping me with the heavier repairs around the property with the particular stubbornness of someone who'd spent a long time being told she was too fragile for work, and had decided she was done being told that. "You're going soft on me, old man," she told me one frost-bright morning, hauling firewood with arms that had gone from matchstick thin to something with real muscle in them. "Letting me do half your chores now." "Wasn't ever soft to begin with," I said. "Just figured a girl who survived what you survived's earned the right to carry her own wood." She grinned at that, the same grin she'd worn the night she beat me 3 times running at her father's card tricks, and went on hauling. The hardest stretch that winter came in February, when a blizzard rolled down off the high country and pinned the 3 of us inside the bathhouse for the better part of 9 days. Snow stacked past the windowsills, the wind finding every gap in the log walls I hadn't yet gotten around to chinking proper. We burned through our wood faster than I'd planned, rationed coffee down to a thin brown water by the 6th day, and on the 7th day the cold got into the walls bad enough that Ruth's cough came back, sharp and sudden, the first bad spell she'd had in 3 months. I watched the fear come up in Adeline's face when she heard it start, watched her go still the particular way she went still whenever her sister's breathing changed. And I understood in that moment that no amount of healed lungs or steady seasons would ever fully unteach a woman the fear of watching someone she loved struggle to breathe. Some fears don't heal. They just get easier to carry, with the right person carrying alongside you. I melted snow over the fire, kept the water near the hottest part of the spring open with a hand axe even as ice tried to creep across the rest of it. And we got Ruth into that water twice a day through the worst of the storm, same as that first bad night. Except this time there were no shotguns between us, no walls of suspicion left standing. Just two people who'd learned each other well enough to work together without needing to say much of anything out loud. On the 8th night, with the wind screaming outside and the fire burned low to save what wood we had left, Adeline sat across from me in the dim light, Ruth finally sleeping easy between us, and she said the thing plain that I think we'd both been circling for months. "I used to think love was a thing that happened to a person," she said, quiet, careful with each word like she was setting down something fragile. "Like weather, something that came on you whether you wanted it or not, and you either survived it or you didn't. I don't think that anymore. I think what's between us got built coal, piece by piece. The roof, the water that bad night, you standing your ground against Dawes when running would have been easier and nobody would have blamed you for it. I didn't fall into loving you. I watched you for months and chose it slow on purpose, the way you choose anything worth keeping. That's the only kind of loving I'd trust myself to be any good at," I said. "Never had much luck with the falling kind, always landed wrong somehow. But the built kind, the kind where a man shows you who he is over and over till you've got no doubt left, I believe I could be good at that. Believe I have been this past year without rightly knowing that's what I was doing." She reached across the small space between us and took my hand, and we sat like that the rest of that long howling night. Snow piling deep outside, fire burning low, Ruth's breath easy and even between us. Three people who'd come together by accident of a card game and a cursed piece of paper and had built, slow and deliberate as anything, something that no blizzard and no man like Dawes and no old grief either sister carried was going to be strong enough to take apart. The storm broke on the 9th morning, sun coming up hard and bright over snow gone blue-white and silent in every direction, and I walked out into it before either sister woke, stood at the spring's edge watching steam rise up into that cold, clean air, and felt something settle into place in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. But that felt, for the first time in my whole drifting life, like the word home actually fit. Adeline and I married that following spring, a small thing, just the three of us and Prout who'd ridden out special to do the honors, having taken a liking to the case, and the people in it during the months it had crossed his desk. We did it at the spring itself, steam rising soft around us in the early light, Ruth standing beside her sister holding a handful of wildflowers she'd picked herself that morning along the rock trail she now walked without the slightest catch in her breath. I stood there in my one good shirt, a man who'd spent 20 years being the kind of person rooms forgot the moment he left them, and I looked at Adeline standing across from me in a dress she'd mended herself, her jaw set the same hard, certain way it had been set the first night she'd pointed a shotgun at my chest, except now that hardness was turned toward holding onto something instead of fighting it off. "I want it said plain," she told me before Prout got us through the words, "in front of my sister and in front of God and in front of whoever's spirit might still linger in this water, kind or cursed or both. I choose you, Cole Ransom, not because you saved us, though you did more than once. I choose you because you're the steadiest man I've ever known, and because you do what needs doing without once needing to be thanked for it, and because my sister is alive and laughing today in no small part because you sat in cold water with her at midnight and never once made it about yourself. I've waited my whole life, without knowing I was waiting, for a man worth choosing on purpose instead of just needing. I'm done waiting." I didn't have words as fine as hers. I never have. What I had was 20 years of being overlooked finally settling into something solid in my chest. The particular weight of being seen, fully, by someone who'd looked hard and looked long and chosen to stay anyway. "I won this place on a hand of cards I didn't even trust," I said. "Worst luck of my life, everybody told me. Cursed water, dead owners, a fool's bargain. Best hand I ever played, far as I can tell now. Won more than a piece of land that night. Took me all summer to understand what." We finished the words. Prout pronounced us married with more ceremony than the occasion probably called for, clearly enjoying himself. Ruth threw her wildflowers, laughing, and the steam rose soft around the three of us in that red rock morning, water that some called cursed and some called sacred, and that I'd come by then to simply call home. That evening, with Ruth asleep early and the new bathhouse roof holding steady against a clean sky thick with stars, Adeline and I sat together by the spring's edge, her shoulder against mine, her hand resting easy in mine, the two of us not needing to fill the quiet with anything more than what was already there. "Tell me something," she said after a while. "If you'd known that night with Ezra Tull what this place would turn into, would you still have put your dollar down?" I thought about it a long moment, watching the steam curl up into the dark, watching a star fall slow and silent somewhere out past the rocks. "I'd have put down everything I had," I said, "and counted it cheap at the price." She laughed soft and leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat there together a good while longer, steam rising around us like breath, like something old and patient finally, after 40 years, allowed to rest easy.